We've just explored Descartes' famous "I think, therefore I am" and its foundational importance. But let's be honest, when you really dig into it, some cracks start to show. Ayer pointed out something crucial. Descartes acts like he's proven these statements about his consciousness and existence are somehow special, self-evidently true. But does his argument actually do that? Or does it just point out a logical connection? It's like saying, if A then B, which is fine but doesn't tell you if you know A or B in the first place. For Descartes' whole project to work, he needs two things: an explanation for why these beliefs feel so reasonable, and an explanation for why they're immune to doubt. The problem is, his account of why they're reasonable basically says nothing. It's like claiming a diamond is hard because it's made of carbon. True, but not very illuminating. Okay, so Descartes is pretty sure he knows he's thinking and existing. But what exactly is he aware of? When he says, "I am thinking," what makes that proposition about him specifically? Is it just that he's using the first-person pronoun? Think about how you perceive other things. You have a sensation of pain, and you seem to be directly aware of that pain. Is it the same with yourself? Does Descartes have this direct, unmediated awareness of his own self when he thinks? Or is it more like when you think about your car, you're not directly acquainted with the car itself, but you have a concept of it? If it's the latter, what concept is he using? He can't be using physical traits, because remember, in the second meditation, he's actively doubting whether he has any body at all. So could it be mental traits? Like, I am the thing that doubts, understands, wills. That sounds plausible, but let's hold on to that thought. Descartes sometimes seems to lean towards this idea of defining himself by his thoughts. He writes things like, "I who was thinking this was something." Sounds a bit circular, right? Is he just restating, "I think therefore I am"? Or is he trying to say his concept of self is the entity that has these specific thoughts? Now if we take this seriously, the whole process of getting certainty changes. It's not just a flash of intuition. Instead, it looks more like a mini reasoning chain. First, I notice a mental state, say a thought. Second, I recognize it as a thought. Third, I somehow conclude only one thing could be having this thought. Fourth, I infer the thing with this thought thinks. And only then, immediately, the thing with this thought exists. See the difference? This isn't a simple, immediate grasp, it's a multi-step process. And that raises some serious problems. So if Descartes is individuating himself by his thoughts, trouble brews. First, there's Elizabeth Anscombe's classic question: how do you know you're not 10 thinkers having a synchronized discussion? Imagine you feel pain and say, "I am in pain." Then you feel sad and say, "I am sad." If you individuate yourself by each feeling, how do you jump to, "I am in pain and sad"? Your reasoning would need an extra step. The thing with this pain is identical to the thing with this sadness. But how can you justify that step? You only know the sensations, not their subject's unity. It's like seeing two people wearing the same hat and concluding they are the same person. Second, there's a subtle but important difference Descartes seems to lose. Consider the thing that produced this idea is perfect versus I am perfect. Both involve thinking about oneself, but the second feels like a deeper, more self-reflective thought. If we reduce both to the thing with this is X, where this refers to the idea, we lose that crucial distinction. It's like saying, the maker of this cake is skilled, is the same as I am a skilled baker. They're not quite the same thought, are they? Alright, let's shift gears slightly. Descartes claims certainty about basic mental stuff. I doubt, I imagine, I seem to see light. But where does this certainty stop? Can he be equally certain about more complex states? Is he definitely angry right now? Is he depressed? In love? He never explicitly says. One possible way to fill this gap is to bring back the idea of incorrigibility. Remember that? The idea that certain beliefs, like, "I seem to see light," are such that you simply cannot have them while being wrong. You can't believe you see light unless you actually seem to see light. If we extend this, maybe Descartes' certainty is limited to these incorrigible beliefs about his mental state. If his beliefs about anger or jealousy aren't incorrigible, if he could potentially be mistaken about them, then they wouldn't count as certain for him. This seems like a plausible move to limit the scope of his claim. But hold on, the idea of incorrigibility itself is shaky ground. Critics like Keith Lehrer argue that even our beliefs about basic sensations aren't necessarily incorrigible. How do we form them? Always through direct intuition, or can we sometimes infer them? Lehrer gives a great example. You might mistake an itch for a pain. Why? Maybe because you wrongly believe itches are pains, or maybe someone told you you'll feel pain now, and you interpreted the itch accordingly. If beliefs can be formed this way, inferentially, then they can be wrong, meaning they are corrigible. Ayer adds another layer. Even if we set aside external references, describing our experiences involves classification. Language forces us to describe, not just name. Saying, "I see white" means you're classifying that current sensation relative to past ones you called white. And classification can be wrong. Even if you check your bodily reactions, you could always invent a reason to doubt your classification, like, maybe I flinched but I didn't notice, or maybe the quality was different but I misjudged it. Logically, you're not forced to abandon your original classification. So, according to Ayer, classifying sense content is just as uncertain as any other empirical claim. It seems Descartes would struggle to respond to these arguments effectively. So, wrapping up this section on Descartes' certainty, we're left with a bunch of fascinating questions. What exactly is this clear and distinct perception he talks about? How does he even conceive of himself when he claims to know he exists? Which of his mental state beliefs are truly incorrigible, and which aren't? What are the contents of those beliefs anyway? And how would he defend their incorrigibility against critics like Lehrer and Ayer? Descartes, it seems, throws down the gauntlet but doesn't fully answer all the questions himself. He raises these deep issues, and that's part of his lasting significance. His attempt to build a secure foundation for knowledge starting from self-awareness is incredibly influential, even if the details are problematic. Now, let's pivot to another central puzzle in Descartes, God. There's a real paradox here. On one hand, Descartes' entire ambitious project for scientific knowledge hinges on being able to know God exists and isn't a deceiver. Without that, his clear perceptions might be illusions. But on the other hand, he explicitly says the very idea of God is beyond our comprehension. How can you build a system on a foundation that you admit you fundamentally don't understand? It's like needing a blueprint for a house, but being told the architect's language is completely incomprehensible. This tension really comes to a head when we look at his proofs for God's existence. Descartes operates under a strict logical principle. You can't ask if something exists without first knowing what it is. Makes sense, right? You can't prove the existence of a unicorn without having some idea of what a unicorn is. Applying this to God, it seems like the idea of God must come first. We need the idea before we can prove its object exists. But then Descartes says something seemingly contradictory. The very reasoning that proves God's existence also reveals what God is. It's like saying the proof itself constructs the concept. How can the idea be both the starting point and the end point of the proof? To untangle this, we need to look closely at the different proofs and consider the relationship between knowing that something exists, the quad, and knowing what it is, the quid. Let's look at the proofs that start from effects, the causal arguments, often called a posteriori proofs. Think about the argument from my idea of God. The starting point is my idea of God, defined by attributes like infinite, eternal, perfect creator. The argument goes, this idea is an effect. It must have a cause adequate to it. Therefore, there exists a cause outside me, which is God. See the double role of the idea. It's part of the effect we're analyzing, and it defines the nature of the cause we conclude exists. If we didn't have the idea of God, we just end up concluding some unknown cause exists, but we wouldn't know what kind of cause. Similarly, in the argument from my existence, the effect my existence as a thinking thing possessing this idea of God. Again, the idea is essential to define the nature of the inferred cause. Without the idea, the conclusion is vague. Now switch to the ontological argument, the a priori proof. Here, the structure flips. The starting point is the idea of God itself. Descartes presents it as, we have an innate idea of a supremely perfect being. Existence is one of the perfections we clearly recognize. Therefore, a supremely perfect being must exist. Here, the idea of God is the subject, and existence is the predicate derived from analyzing the idea's nature. It's less about tracing an effect back to a cause, and more about unpacking the concept of perfection itself. Interestingly, if we look back at an earlier work, the Discourse on the Method, Descartes seems to present the idea of God differently. It looks like the idea is constructed during the proof, especially in the causal arguments. He describes a process. Start by noticing you lack certain perfections compared to something more perfect. Then amplify your finite perfections like knowledge, power towards infinity. Finally, unify all these infinite perfections into a single, incomprehensible whole. This constructed idea is then used in the argument. What's fascinating here is that the idea of God seems to be defined by the goal towards which we strive, the ideal state we aspire to be. Our limitations make us aware of God's boundlessness. It's a bit like how we grasp mathematical infinity. We understand it through processes, like counting indefinitely, even though we can never fully comprehend the actual infinite number itself. Now, does this mean the idea is entirely invented? Not quite. The text suggests it's more like making explicit an innate idea. Descartes emphasizes that the idea of God is innate, like a faculty or power we possess. This innate power allows us to construct a version of the idea that fits our finite understanding. It's adapted to our capacity. Think of it like this. The infinite God is like a vast, incomprehensible palace. Our innate idea is like a key or a map. The process of reflection helps us make the map explicit, showing the grandeur and complexity. But we always acknowledge the vastness beyond our map. The Principles passage confirms this, explicitly mentioning reflecting on the innate idea of God. So, it's not pure construction, but rather bringing forth or clarifying something already present within us. This brings us to a fundamental distinction in metaphysics: essence, quid what something is, versus existence, quod that it is. Normally, logic suggests we should figure out what something is before asserting it exists. But Descartes messes with this. With the cogito existence, I exist, comes first, followed by the clarification of essence, I am only a thing that thinks. But even then, he implicitly knew something about his essence to make the initial inference. With the body, he clarifies the essence, extension before proving existence. But with God, it's different. For God, the process of proving existence and determining essence happen together. The very act of reflecting on the idea of God, its incomprehensibility, its perfection, is what both establishes God's existence and starts to define God's nature. The terms we use, like God, don't have a pre-existing meaning we tap into. Their meaning is forged in the fires of this metaphysical argument. So, we're left with this consistency puzzle. How can the idea of God be both the prerequisite for the proof and something revealed through the proof? The text suggests the answer lies in carefully distinguishing the structures of the different proofs, understanding the dynamic interplay between existence and essence, especially for God, where they unfold simultaneously, and crucially, recognizing the role of incomprehensibility. It's precisely because we can't fully grasp the infinite that the process of reasoning about it can proceed. Descartes' treatment of God remains a cornerstone of his philosophy, a place where reason pushes against the limits of understanding, creating a fascinating and enduring challenge. That wraps up our deep dive into these Cartesian complexities.